Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
This is Serious Privacy. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart and Kay Royal.
If you are a movie fan, you may recall Catherine Zeta-Jones playing a Europol agent in Ocean's 12, swinging her gun, making arrests in the field, similar to what an FBI counterpart would do in the United States. But the reality of Europol is quite different. Based in The Hague, just a few minutes away from my house actually, the European Police Agency's main mission is to support the EU member states and selected third countries in preventing and combating all forms of serious international and organized crime, cybercrime, and terrorism. Think, for example, about taking down hacker marketplaces, selling stolen identities, or dismantling drugs trafficking networks. You can probably imagine the amount of personal data that is needed to make all the crime analysis. And because of that, Europol for a long time already claims to have one of the most robust data protection frameworks in the world of law enforcement. Our guests today are responsible for that framework. Daniel Drewer is the head of Europol's Data Protection Office, and Jan Ellerman, one of the senior experts. They talk to us about what it means to protect personal data in a law enforcement context. Every piece of personal data could be that one missing piece of the puzzle. My name is Paul Breitbart.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. So I'm on the road, and I don't have my book for the unexpected questions. So, gentlemen, I'm going to create an unexpected question, and I want to ask, if you were going to be a criminal, what kind of criminal would you be?
That is really an unexpected. And first of all, thanks a lot for having us in your fantastic podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Jan and we both enjoy.
Thank you.
When we listen to it. Yeah, what kind of criminal? I hope somebody that will not do too much damage.
I like it.
Yes, that is maybe also a bit sympathetic. You know, I come from Hamburg and Jan also comes very much from the north of Germany. And we have, at least in the harbor city of Hamburg, we have a criminal scene that is very traditional and have their old code of conduct. I don't know if they apply it still today, but they say we are serious criminals, but what we will never do, we will never harm women, we will never harm children. We stay in our network. So probably, of course, I don't want to be a criminal, but it would be in that direction. But great question, thanks.
I like having that honor as a criminal. I like it.
So Jan, what about you?
Yeah, I subscribe, and I guess like in the real world, I would probably then be the deputy of the big boss of the organized criminal network and the guy for the confidential jobs. But I could expand on that here, of course. So ethics are very important, and of course we would also fight for compliance with fundamental rights in that particular role, I guess.
I like the honor among criminals, Paul. Where are you going with it?
Could I be a thief of hearts?
You are. I think you are.
No, but if I were to be a real criminal, then probably being from the Netherlands, something drugs related would make sense because that's easiest to get into.
Drugs. I like that. I'm sitting here thinking, the other day, the question came up, which I rarely ever admit to, but I'm going to right now. What did I want to be when I grew up? I wanted to be a madam and run all the prostitutes.
Well, that would not be illegal here.
So that's right. It might not be a criminal on your side. So on your side, maybe I'll go for speeding. Is that criminal?
It can be. It depends on your speed, but I'm sure you would manage. Yeah.
With that car of yours, you could certainly manage.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get to the real interesting questions then, which are not the unexpected questions. It's the substantive matter. So, Paul, you're up first.
Yeah, well, I think the easiest question to start with is what is Europol? Because a lot of our listeners will not be as familiar with the organization as I am. I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time with both of you while I was there working for the Dutch DPA, also part of the joint supervisory body of Europol, which at the time was all the assembled European data protection authorities supervising Europol's data processing. So I've seen quite a lot from the inside, but I think you can better tell what Europol actually is.
Yes, thanks, Paul. I will try to not to use the word Interpol when I describe Europol. But Paul, we know each other when you were still in joint body for Europol, and you are from The Hague. So Europol is the EU law enforcement agency, and it was always in The Hague, in the Netherlands. They are our headquarters. We support EU member states in preventing and combating organized crime, cybercrime, and terrorism. And indeed, Paul, at the start, you mentioned, I think it was Ocean 11, the movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Those were criminals.
They were the serious criminals. Yeah? And at that time, there was already one mistake in that movie. I mean, there were several mistakes. One mistake was certainly that Europol is not in the position to take coercive measures. So you saw Catherine Zeta-Jones going around with a gun in Amsterdam.
Right.
And the second mistake, were also very important, I guess, for Paul, is that Europol is not in Amsterdam but in The Hague, and it has been always in The Hague. So what are we talking about when we talk about Europol as the EU law enforcement agency? So there's 1,400 plus workforce working here in The Hague, 250 plus liaison officers. So that is actually officers that join us from EU law enforcement authorities. They are also all in The Hague. So there's 250 liaison officers from the EU member states and also from the third states. They are with us here in The Hague. Europol follows a multi-agency approach. So it's not that we have only one police force represented here. There are always all police forces from the national level presented here at Europol. Just as an example, if I look at the Italian law enforcement landscape, if you want, we have here with us one representative of the Carabinieri, another one from the Polizia di Stato, and one from the Guardia di Finanza. They work on one corridor with the Swedes, and they work on one corridor with the Danes. So that means police cooperation, and you could say Europol is a criminal information hub, takes place here on our dedicated systems that we have for this, but also by actually crossing the corridor. And you just visit the other country, the office of the other country, and exchange with them information that we need in the fight against organized crime and terrorism. We have more than 2,600 secure lines that go into the EU member states and third states. And maybe we can talk later a bit more what are the third states and what is our close cooperation there. And we connect them with a system with the name of the town Siena. So this is our Siena system. Paul actually also inspected it in the past.
I did.
It grew immensely during the last years. We talk about 2,600 secure lines. If you are in The Hague and you are close to the international zone and you are back from one of the nice bars in The Hague city center at 3:00 in the night and you pass the Europol building, you will see that there are 4 towers, and the tower that is the highest has always the light on top of it. And there's our operational center with 24/7 colleagues present there in an emergency situation that can respond directly to situations that are brought by the member states to us. We have analysis projects at Europol where we look at different crime phenomena, be it drugs, be it where we process data and analyze data with 150 plus analysts that are working here in the headquarters. So the 150 analysts are looking at it is always difficult to bring numbers with the vast amount of data that we receive from member states and as data protection experts. Not all this data is also data, but most of the data is personal data. But if you look at Europol's information system, we have there more than 1.5 million data sets.
Wow.
Data sets about suspects, data about offenses, individuals involved, linked to offenses. This information system is regularly updated, if you want, by the hour, to ensure that the data is accurate and available for the police forces amongst the European Union. I think that is a bit the broad overview that I want to give, but I think it is important. It's a criminal information hub, and it is the focus of the police cooperation in the European Union and beyond.
And maybe if you just allow one more sentence on what it is not, and you already mentioned it, like we are not the European FBI, we don't have coercive powers. So talking about Zeta-Jones in Ocean's 12, my favorite scene in the movie really is the one where Zeta-Jones, also known as Agent Callahan, if I'm not mistaken, enters the crime scene in Amsterdam. And she is utterly rude to the local investigators. She says something like, Agent Callahan, Europol, from here on, we take over the investigation. And by the way, I hope you guys haven't contaminated the crime scene. So this is very polite, of course, and she could have known better because I happened to be an intern back in 2003 when the rumor was spreading that Zeta-Jones be visiting Europol headquarters to see what real Europol agents look like. And then it even got more out of control when the rumor was that Brad Pitt would be joining her. So you can imagine that everybody was incredibly excited because we all thought, okay, probably it's going to be me to explain all of that to her. Ultimately, personally, I know one human being who really met Zeta-Jones, and that was the then director of Europol, Jürgen Storbeck. And there was a picture in the hallway showing him and Zeta-Jones, which, by the way, was stolen at some point. So there is a crime going even within the building at times.
Very nice. So yeah, I think that is the biggest misconception. If people see Europol in popular media, it is always about being very active in the field, whereas in my words, it's much more coordinating what is happening in the field, and especially when it comes to the data, making sure that all of that is exchanged, that people know from all the different member states and the third countries, this is the information that is relevant to this specific information, to this specific investigation.
Yeah, indeed. And once again, everybody thinks Europol that is somewhere in the European Union, but nobody knows exactly. Just yesterday evening, I saw a thriller on TV, and the agent there said she's now transferred to Europol to Brussels. I think, Paul, first, as somebody from The Hague, I don't know how you can tolerate this.
Oh, I don't, but
yeah, you should not know, but. Indeed, I think the more Europol got into the focus of media, the more this fiction stories are around about Europol, and we see all kind of interesting developments, and even taxi drivers in The Hague are sometimes wondering, because I think I was working only for 5 years or 6 years at Europol, and I came back from a mission, and I took the taxi from the central station home. And then we passed at that time the old Europol building, and the taxi driver, he thought that I'm a tourist, and he said, well, here is where Interpol works. So you see, even the people from The Hague, they don't know sometimes, but okay.
I think by now they recognized the new building with the 4 towers that you just described. Jan, you mentioned that you were an intern at Europol. Now you are in the data protection office. How did you end up there?
That was execution of a master plan to a certain degree. So I started with a PhD back in 1999, I believe, comparing Europol with the FBI. Because at that time, it was very popular in Germany to call for exactly that. So it was Ernst Kohl, I believe, who said Europol should be the European FBI. And then I thought, if everybody is talking about that, maybe somebody should take a closer look. And if you take that closer look, you come to the conclusion that, of course, to this day, the FBI is one of the most powerful agencies in the world. But if you study the history, there are also dark chapters, which definitely we don't want to see repeated at Europol, also from a privacy and data protection perspective. Mm-hmm. So As you guys know, under lead of J. Edgar Hoover, FBI had hidden files. And for instance, when Kennedy was president, the FBI would let him know, I think they spoke to his brother and they said something like, if you could just convey to the president that we've come across that little thing with Marilyn Monroe, but don't worry about it. Information is safe with us. So that was blackmailing basically, and was to keep J. Edgar Hoover in power, which he stayed until his death in 1972, if I remember well. So that was, I came to Europol from a research angle. I basically kind of blackmailed the organization because at some point I called them. I called them and I said, I'm doing a PhD on your organization. And there are two possibilities. Either you allow me to come in and ask a lot of questions. And if you have good answers to these questions, I'm happy to also write them down. Or option 2 is you say that's not possible, but that will just leave me with what I can read in the academic magazines and journals and publications. And that is rather critical. And then it took like a week or something, and they got back to me and said, well, you're in. You can come and you can ask your questions, and we are happy to answer them. And when I then joined Europol, indeed, back in 2003, I met a lot of very committed colleagues. And to be honest, already at that point, the idea grew in my head that someday I wanted to be part of this, which then happened in 2007. And ever since, I'm working with Daniel to get it right. Let's say.
Let me jump in here because I'm going to have to jump off a little bit here soon. But let me just ask. So when you talk about, the worst case secret in the FBI with Marilyn Monroe, that's one thing. But when you look at this criticism that the U.S. is undergoing with the massive government surveillance, knowing that y'all have the fundamental right to privacy in Europe, what are your thoughts on that? Because we know that all governments have to have surveillance for terrorist threats and, bad crimes that are going on. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thanks.
Or is that a question I shouldn't be asking?
No, but that is a question to be expected. Of course, if you have an organization like Europol that is processing a vast amount of data, although I always say it's true that law enforcement processes more data than 10 years ago. But isn't this true for all areas of the society? Mm-hmm. I mean, look at insurance companies, look at internet companies, look at your iPhone that you have. 10 years ago, it looked completely different. That had less storage capacity.
Right.
Still, of course, processing of personal data or processing of information by the police is always, in my personal view, as a litmus test for democracy. If you want to know
I like that.
How is police actually towards the citizen in the society? One of a good tests that you can do is actually to see how do they process the personal data in the law enforcement environment. And so you see the same question comes all over again when we talk about Europol's cooperation with third states. One of the key questions is always, how is the third state complying with human rights, but also do they have a data protection system in place that is comparable to the system that law enforcement in the EU has? I see Jan that is very keen to answer the question that you had. And so I would like to leave it up to him, because actually I can also reveal this on that topic that you asked. We actually wrote an article that is not yet published, but will be published soon. But please, Jan, maybe if you...
just to compliment, because I think it's a very valid and a very good question. I think, let's say, the concerns regarding mass surveillance by governments are understandable. And our job is really to listen carefully and to also stay in touch with all those activists and NGOs who are out there at a very legitimate aim to prevent 1984 Orwellian mass surveillance state. And right. I fully support that. Yeah. Sorry, Kay. Yeah.
Just agreeing with you, because one of the things that very much comes up is the big brother, the government oversight from that. But we all know that terrorism and major crime is a huge threat to all areas of the world. And how else is the government supposed to keep their people in their country safe unless they are doing some sort of surveillance to find out? But I have one specific question then. So if you are doing, like, I'm going back to the movies, the wiretaps. If you're doing the wiretaps and you're intercepting phone calls or communications or a communication construct like using what is it, WeChat or Snapchat or things like that. What do you do about the incidental? Oh, sorry, another plane.
But it's good the airplane interrupts you, because there I need to correct you. Europol doesn't do any wiretaps. So we don't do that. It's for national law enforcement authorities to do that and then to share the information with us for crime analysis.
That's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because for us, it's not at our discretion to say we find this or that interesting and hence we tap into the communications. All these are coercive measures in the legal sense, and they are subject to national sovereignty. Allow me just 2 more sentences on the dialogue with, let's say, critics and activists and NGOs and so on and so forth. We are investing into that, and we understand that this is important because at law enforcement, we also need to be aware of the concerns out there. And this is where we have founded something which is called Europol Data Protection Experts Network. So the nice abbreviation EDEN. And Eden is there to keep in touch and to talk about things, because we all benefit. If we listen carefully to those who are very concerned about mass surveillance, we can learn a lot. But it also works the other way around, because we also need to explain as members of Europol's data protection function what is driving our operational colleagues and kind of translate it into the privacy and data protection bubble. And this results in really, really interesting discussions. Yeah, most of the times a bit like the one we have right now with you guys.
I love it. And I wish more people here in the U.S. government would listen. But that's a whole nother podcast.
I mean, they can start by listening to this episode and then we'll learn from there. But there are good relations between Europol and also the U.S. counterparts, right?
Exactly. And maybe I like always the description what Jan already mentioned, that the information that we get is actually the chosen information, is selected information from member states. So I mentioned the 1.5 million data sets in the Europol information system, but this is handpicked information. That is information that third states and the EU member states decided to share with Europol because they believe Europol needs this information for its mission. So I know, of course, when we talk about government surveillance, we always say, well, this haystack, and you look for the needle in the haystack. If you want, what we have at Europol, we have a haystack but full of needles, because the information is already collected, and there is no side information that is given which doesn't fit into our mandate, because then we simply cannot accept it. If we get this kind of information, we would say, sorry, it doesn't fit into our legal framework and we are not allowed to accept it.
So when you have so much data and so much personal data, because you mentioned most of these files relate to individuals, how do you go about data protection? Because I think Europol is one of the few law enforcement agencies that was actually created at the time when data protection already started to be an issue. So you could probably take a bit of a privacy by design approach.
Exactly. We have to say that Europol started activities already in 1999. And if you look at the first legal framework that Europol got, the Europol Convention, then you see already there are 2 chapters only on data protection, only on instructions actually for Europol and also the member states how to process data. The do's and don'ts were already in the first framework. And what we saw over the years, so I joined Europol in 2003, that the frameworks that we got after the convention got even more sophisticated when it comes to data protection. The rules became more strict, but I have to say, on the one side more strict, on the other side also Europol had more possibilities to extend on its operational activities. Like, for example, when I started at Europol, we had not operational centers like we have now, the European Cybercrime Center. And Europol is also, by the way, because the legislator and the parliament especially trust Europol in being good in data protection in this particular sensitive field for police operation. Well, the legislator always decided already with a Danish protocol to the Europol Council decision, always decided to give Europol more possibility with a more sophisticated and also more restrictive data protection framework to follow.
So it was a bit of a quid pro quo.
Yes, exactly. That's why at Europol you could say, well, data protection was there from day one, and the data protection rules were there from day one. But then over the years, more than 2 decades, the data protection culture developed, the data protection framework developed, the relation between data protection and information security and confidentiality developed to have one integrated data management framework for the processing of law enforcement and information. And all this, we got the data protection officer in 2010. Yeah, that was when Europol became an EU agency. Before we were an international organization, when we became an EU agency, there was also the requirement then to have one of the first data protection officers in this particular area. So that's why data protection is extremely important. And every one of our colleagues that joins us at Europol cannot start actually with the processing of police information here in this organization without having undergone a training that includes fundamental rights, but also includes in particular the processing of operational data, which is in most of the cases personal data. And we are quite proud of this, I have to say, because the colleagues that join us go certainly through a development when it comes to learn how police cooperation functions, but they also have the possibility to learn more about data protection. And then they go back into the national police forces and take this idea about how Europol operates quite sophisticated data protection rules in information processing.
Yeah, I was Anya just mentioned it briefly, but I think I would like to emphasize that because it's a bit of history made here. So Anya, you said data protection officer was introduced back in 2010. Well, that is significant because the requirement for national law enforcement authorities to have a DPO, as we all know, was only introduced years later by means of the Law Enforcement Directive, which was kind of mirroring the GDPR to a certain degree. So I would even in that context go as far as saying, well, we've pioneered law enforcement or data protection law enforcement to a certain degree by setting up an organization or cultivating a culture where this is an integral part of our operational business years before the legislator said, no, this is not your discretion to set it up like this. It's a legal requirement to respect fundamental rights. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Europol, of course, evidently, first and foremost, the right to data protection.
So how does Europol's current data protection framework compare to the GDPR or the Law Enforcement Directive?
That's a good question, but can I come back to the point that mentioned about the developments that we had? I just wanted to say, I think we were also the first law enforcement agency that celebrated Data Protection Day on 28th of January.
Very good.
Very nice.
And I still remember, I think it was 2008 or 2009. We, at that time, and Jan, I think you just joined, we had the first time data protection. We had always kind of something for the Data Protection Day, but then we said, okay, we need also kind of gimmicks, so kind of a giveaway for Europol stuff on the Data Protection Day. And I remember at that time, we gave little bottles with cream to Europol stuff, in January in The Hague. And we say, well, you know what? Privacy is about protecting yourself. And here, please, this is for the Data Protection Day sun cream for you, little bottles of sun cream.
All ready for the summer.
Yeah, already for the summer, if there's summer in The Hague.
Daniel, you forgot to mention my idea was always to distribute condoms to protect your most sensitive personal data, but that was heavily objected by the boss, so it always remained an idea.
Well, it was not, it was a budget issue at that time. Sun cream was cheaper.
Yeah, agree.
So coming back to the earlier question on GDPR and the Law Enforcement Directive, how do you measure your own framework against what everybody is familiar with?
Yes. So for us, we have now we have the Europol regulation with two chapters with data protection provisions. And what I always say is the fact that Europol has a tailor-made data protection framework for us is not a burden, but it's a privilege, actually, because the framework that is now has been amended in June last year. So we have now the amended Europol regulation, foresees restrictions, of course, to the processing of personal data, but also foresees exceptions for law enforcement. So, for example, when we talk about the narrowly tailored exceptions for data subject access requests, where in comparison with GDPR provisions, Europol has the possibility, we have a citizen request, and the citizen request for access to his or her data results in a hit in our systems, has the possibility, by using narrowly tailored exceptions, to not to inform the citizen whether he or she is in our systems or not. Mm-hmm. This is in my opinion, privilege that the police has in order that we are able to fulfill our mission. But it comes with a burden, which means, for example, that for the 700 data subject access requests we get per year, we invest resources in this. Data subject access requests are handled by the data protection unit, so are handled actually by my office, which is doing that the data protection officer is independent in his judgment at Europol and in the activity of the data protection unit, which is an assurance safeguard also for citizens that ask access. Because what will happen is the following, if I can go there, because I think data subject access request is a good example to show what is the difference, GDPR, law enforcement directive, and Europol regulation. If we come to the conclusion that, for example, a suspect in a terrorism case should not get information that he or she is processed by Europol, we could use one of the exceptions, but we have to put the reasoning on paper.
Right. Okay.
When this decision is made, no, we cannot allow access to this information. And by the way, a lot of the requests from citizens come not anymore. When I started at Europol, just as a comparison, we had in 2013, in 2003, we had 10 or 11 requests per year. And now we have 700 requests.
Yeah, that's a big increase.
And of the 700, and that shows also the development a bit of Europol. And the 700 requests that we get, they're partly coming from defense lawyers on behalf of their clients and partly come from the citizen themselves. We don't make a distinction in there because it doesn't matter if the grandmother asks for access or the prime suspect in a financial crime case. Every request is handled according to the same process that we have in place. So Europol invests in the handling of these requests. We have 3 months to answer to the request. And in most of the cases, we are able to answer within 3 months. The reason actually why sometimes there's a delay is that Europol has also an obligation to talk actually with all member states and data contributor about this specific data item. Yeah. And we take this very serious. And if the executive director of Europol uses one of the exceptions to not provide access to the data, that must be on the basis of the reasoned decision, which by the way can be always overruled by the European data protection supervisor if the data subject decides to go into appeal. But instead of overruling the decision, I think more important is the institute of indirect access to the citizen. Because on the basis of the appeal, the supervisory authority has then the possibility to actually, and you did it in the past yourself, Paul, to actually check what kind of information on behalf of the citizen is in the database and then make a check on the reasoning of Europol provided and then actually decide whether the Europol responded to the data subject in the right way. So that is, on the one side, privilege, I have to say, but comes with a burden. Or what I think Jan always says, what was it again? Great power comes with huge responsibility or something like that.
It was Spider-Man who said that, but I quote Spider-Man sometimes.
Okay, here we go.
But contrary to popular belief, it is not that you receive an access request, you see it's from a criminal and you say, oh no, we're not going to say anything, so access denied. You actually do a verification to see if maybe parts of the request can be fulfilled, if you can share something, if you can confirm, yes, we do process personal data, but we cannot share the details, or sometimes indeed you just don't say anything.
Exactly.
Or you tell them that you cannot say anything.
Exactly. And I'm not going now into the details, but the resource investment of Europol is significant. But I think it's also justified because it is important that citizens have the possibility to ask, first of all, law enforcement for access, or whether data is processed by law enforcement, but then also get a response in line with the rules applicable.
Jan, which is the part that you are most proud of if you look at Europol's data protection approach?
Well, I think that we have established a culture here whereby our operational colleagues understand how important data protection is. So we can really rely on the overwhelming majority of our operational colleagues to proactively approach us if they have questions. So we are available, say, and it's not like we would be bound to accessing databases behind their backs and snooping and this kind of stuff. But we've established the data protection function of Europol as an entity where also our operational colleagues understand, okay, there's added value for them because they want to do the right thing. They don't want to go into lawful data processing. This is an investment which you have to make because I think many data protection officers seem to be, let's say, the long arm of external supervision. And if you talk to the DPO, then you can also immediately hang yourself because the external data protection supervisory authority is on a slam this and so on and so forth. So this is to my firm opinion, not how it works, but you have a kind of mediation role. On the one hand, to convey the guidance by external data advisory authorities into the operational domain. And on the other hand, also, when we debate things and when we have our regular meetings with EDPS colleagues, to try to make, let's say, the daily challenge which our operational colleagues have in fighting serious crime and terrorism, to translate that, let's say, in a way that the data protection perspective comes understandable. And that's something I'm proud of.
So Daniel, when I recall my time supervising Europol data processing, and that's already quite a couple of years ago that I did an inspection for the last time, but I also recall the conversations about your audits and the way you do inspections internally. And I always thought that was fascinating to see how do you go about actually monitoring that data protection compliance exists in an organization with almost 2,000 people working there with 1.5 million files. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, I think you mentioned it yourself. Audit is, of course, we know is done by auditors. And if we then talk about the data protection officer at Europol, this is a function that is an assurance provider to management. So our main task is actually to inform management about the health situation and data protection compliance of the processing operation. And in this regard, we have to do checks, of course. We have to have a look to the information processing operation. And this we do regularly. And we are not just looking at it, we also document our checks that we make. But I think it is important. I think two points are here in particular important. The first point is we do the checks always with the intention and with the mission to make the data processing operations better. If we find something where we think this is not in line with the legal framework, we support the controller to bring it into data protection compliance as soon as possible. So we are not going through the organization and doing on behalf of the supervision the checks. Mm-hmm. We go through the organization where we believe it is worth to make the checks, to invest resources in this regard, because resources are all everywhere scarce. Although I have to say the data protection function of Europol, I think, is still the biggest data protection unit of all EU public service. And I think that should be also mentioned. But of course, we cannot be with 8 colleagues. We cannot be everywhere. And I also don't think it's even necessary to be everywhere. Looking at the accountability shift of the controller in the EU data protection reform package. But we are in the best position to look there where we think it's absolutely necessary now to have a closer look. And then immediately afterwards, together with the controller, look at improvement. Of course, there might be cases where we have a look and we say, well, this is absolutely not possible. And then there's the possibility to escalate. And if you want, to in a very clear language to say this has to stop now, because this is not, in our opinion, the agency takes risks, and there we have to warn in this regard, and then the data protection officer has the possibility also to escalate it. But I think it is important that controller, and in this case at Europol, the police officers, see the data protection function as a companion actually to achieve data protection compliance in a law enforcement environment. So if you ask me what I'm proud of, especially in the development of Europol over the last 2 decades, is I think you can now ask any Europol official about his work, and anyone will say to you, yes, I'm fighting organized crime and terrorism, and I do this with cooperation and with analysis, but there is data protection part of the package. If data protection is not part of this product, it's not a good product. I can probably not use this later on in a judicial proceeding. So I think there's a data protection culture that developed over the years. And the good thing is that the executive director of Europol decided some years ago to say, well, I think what the work of the data protection office at Europol is something that can, as an example, also to other data protection offices in the police environment on national level. And therefore, she decided to establish a working group of the data protection officers of the national police forces right here at Europol, where there's actually no difference anymore if you have the experts on synthetic drugs meeting in The Hague and talk about the fight against production of synthetic drugs, or the data protection officers of the national police forces meeting at Europol and discussing operational matters that are important when we talk about data protection compliance. And this is something we enjoy. And I think it's a very important meeting. But this is a reason, we talk now about the last 2 years or briefly before COVID we started, and this develops. And that is, I think, the important part. It is sensitive work that we are doing in the law enforcement environment. It is somehow also, considering the changes in the legal framework, sometimes a work in progress, like it is in all other areas of the society when we talk about data protection. But in particular, in the area of law enforcement, that simply has to be recognized. Sometimes it is work in progress. And we are working very hard to get there. And if we are able also to share our expertise with data protection officers and allow them to have a Europol platform where they can help each other and support each other, that's very good, because you know, Paul, yourself, you're also data protection officer. Data protection officer is, it doesn't matter where you work, sometimes quite a lonely year.
Of course, it can always be. Yes.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So you look to the left and the right, and all of a sudden, when situation gets, then there's nobody anymore. Luckily for me, not, because I have Jan there and all the other colleagues in my unit that stand with me together. But it is important that data protection officers exchange, in particular in the area of police. It is important that they have this platform here at Europol. And we are very happy to sponsor this.
So we are at the end of our recording time. Is there anything that you really had wanted to bring across that we haven't covered yet? Because I still have dozens of questions that people could be interested in. We do not have the time for that today. But if there are any issues that you would have wanted to raise, then please feel free to do so.
I think it should. Eden, you mentioned.
I mentioned Eden, but indeed I would seize the opportunity to invite you, Paul, but also all the people who may listen to your podcast to join us in Madrid for the next upcoming Eden conference, Spirits of Contrast, it's called, 18th and 19th of September. So I say the weather is going to be amazing. So Madrid is the best place on the planet on that particular day. And if you like, let's say, the kind of debate we are having here, the Eden conference is full of that, with really inspiring speakers. And that would maybe be something I would still love to mention.
And Paul, if I may also mention something, we had at Europol, we had in 2022 an escape room challenge.
Yes.
Where all units of Europol were allowed to participate. And I just wanted to mention the data protection unit of Europol won this challenge with a huge advance to the other. I think has also to be said.
Very good. Well, on that happy note, we'll end another episode of Serious Privacy. Thank you both for joining us this week. If you like these episodes, like and subscribe to the podcast in your favorite app or on your favorite podcast platform. Join the conversation on LinkedIn. Find us under Serious Privacy. You'll find Kay on social media as Heart of Privacy and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.